The motor racing genre is one of the oldest in the motion picture industry. It has evolved over the last 100 years in trying to bring its audience as much into the driver's seat as possible and continues to produce some of the best crafted films to come out of Hollywood, and its international appeal makes it a genre with an ever-present world interest. MFP presents 10 must-see racing movies.
In 1945, somebody had the crazy idea of putting Wendell Scott, black taxi driver and bootlegger, on a racetrack.
Starring Richard Pryor in one of his more dramatic roles, Grease Lightning tells the story of Wendell Scott, one of the first African Americans to take part in the famous stock car racing in NASCAR and other Southern derbies in the 1950s and 60s. Similar to the early release film The Last American Hero that showed the rise of a moonshine runner of the Deep South turned pro stock car racer Junior Johnson, Grease Lightning, however, focused more on the social difficulties Scott had to face as he had to deal with the issues of racism during a time where even an important, clearly won victory was not to be initially given to him after winning the race. One of the reasons was due to a fear of seeing a black man kiss the trophy girl at the end of the event in front of a predominantly white crowd. Without sponsorship or ease of financial support, Scott did overcome all he could to follow his passion no matter the odds that were against him, and would eventually compete among some of the best drivers of that era. After initially replacing Melvin Van Peebles, who left the project due to artistic differences, Michael Schultz took over the task of directing as an almost fireman's job, brought in to clean and wrap up a film which took a lot of liberties with the true story of Scott and created an almost what-if ending to a story that more or less gave a Hollywood take on a hard life in racing that perhaps should have been played more closer to the truth. Scott was eventually inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in January of 2015, and the film remains as a tribute to the determination of his efforts and in the spirit of never giving up no matter the struggles that one has to overcome.
Damn, I beat him fair and square. I damn near lapped him once. And I want everybody to know it.
She dreamed of winning. She wanted to go where only a few men had ventured. Some made it, and some didn't.
One of the few films to ever be released on Top Fuel and funny car drag racing, Heart Like a Wheel is another biopic, only this time it would focus on champion drag racer Shirley Muldowney, played by Bonnie Bedelia, much to the racer's dismay as she originally wanted Jamie Lee Curtis to play her part and felt Bedelia did not carry herself well as a would-be racer. A rare and obscure film, Heart Like a Wheel played loosely on its original source material, as Shirley Muldowney did feel it was not as accurate to her actual life as a racer, but did go on to be more recognised for her accomplishments and would become a well-respected figure in the motor world, and the film was praised for giving more recognition to the sport. The film was released while Muldowney was still an active competitor in one of the fastest racing sports on earth, and was well received by critics, though due to its low budget and lack of popularity of the sport, was not a financial success. It was not long after Heart Like a Wheel was released, Muldowney suffered one of the most horrific crashes in drag racing, where she was left permanently injured and limited in her mobility after her right leg was shattered and left ankle was fused together. She would later make another comeback as she had done in the past after a year and a half of recovery, and would go on to be a champion once again till her retirement in 2003. Though not easily obtainable in HD as it is a film that has been mostly forgotten, the film is still available for viewing and is an interesting look at a unique individual in motorsport rarely mentioned in Hollywood.
If you call winning 3 national events in a row in 1 year average, what would you call your record?
Made for less than $3 million US, this Norwegian racing comedy has gone on to gain popularity in further installments since its initial release in 2014, and a second sequel is now in the works to be distributed by Netflix. Burning is a reminder that a big Hollywood budget is not always needed to show off an interest and passion in racing, as the producers and director, with the help of CGI and old-fashioned filming, are able to showcase a number of entertaining racing sequences in this modern-day cross-country speedfest. With a great collection of some of the best-looking cars from around the globe and from past to present inclusions in Japanese drifters, modern sports and American muscle, Burning is a surprise Scandinavian take on the Cannonball Run style coast-to-coast race made famous in the 1970s and 80s. The film in fact starts off with the dedication of famed stuntman turned director Hal Needham, who directed the Burt Reynolds Smokey and the Bandit and the aforementioned Cannonball Run films, as Burning draws inspiration from the wacky style of racing films of the past, not often seen as much in Hollywood anymore. The film's main choice of car is surprisingly a yellow and black 1967 Ford Mustang 289 Fastback, which features throughout the franchise and is shown to be the car of choice for the main protagonist. Although there are some obvious uses of CGI in the film when it comes to the performance of some of the stunts of the cars, the ambition to bring the film outside of the Hollywood system without the budget to back it up does allow for some inventive situations, and overall the film is very self-aware of its own limitations, yet goes along with them and is not afraid to experiment and has gained popularity as the years have gone on. The first of a film series from Japan that dealt with the style of racing made famous by the Midnight Club illegal street racing group, Shotokushoku Trial was the first of 6 films to be released in the late 80s and 90s and had been seen as the father of the Fast and Furious franchise with its Japanese mod street racing. Featuring a silver 1981 Nissan Skyline 2000 Turbo RS and based on the highly selective and illegal Japanese street racing that took place in the 80s, Shotokushoku Trial, also known as Megalopolis Expressway Trial, was a low-budget Japanese film series that its first film had been banned in its native Japan from cinema release and would showcase the obsession of modifying streetcars in order to achieve one goal, that was speed and breaking of a record. Some of these cars were able to reach speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour and were so fast and so well equipped that they were responsible for the rule that if the police could not pursue and capture these racers, that no pursuit was to be given at all. Focusing on a young driver looking to break the speed record held by a Formula 1 racer on the Shito Expressway, the film and its subject matter had started an international interest in Japanese small-engine cars modified to an extreme that would later explode in popularity come the early 2000s with the release of the Fast and the Furious franchise and the many subsequent clones and video games that would follow.
I want you to go back out on that track and hit the pace car. Hit the pace car? Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other goddamn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
Showing an interest in race driving after his co-star from the 1986 hit Color of Money, Paul Newman, introduced him to the sport, Tom Cruise's star was on the rise and was now in the lead to work again with his Top Gun production crew of Brockheimer and Simpson and director Tony Scott to follow up with Days of Thunder. It was Cruise who had approached Simpson and Brockheimer after hearing several stories NASCAR drivers had shared with him, who he had gotten to know as a result of his newfound interest, and requested the film be made based on the motorsport. Having limited options other than actually filming real racing events like that of the Daytona 500 during the season, in order to place several cars used for the films mounted with cameras, the producers needed to actually manufacture cars that could qualify to be raceworthy in order to insert them with stunt drivers during the events. To save time after several laps of racing and filming, the cars mounted with cameras would come in, and instead of changing the film to continue shooting, it was found to be more efficient to replace the cameras itself. As with a number of other films on this list, the secondary actors along with the lead would be taken out and trained to race for several weeks before production in order to have them seen in close-ups while racing. Given the one-time only chance to film at the Daytona 500 before the approaching summer release date, over 22 cameras were placed at selected key locations around the track to get the footage needed. Remembered for its stylized and cheesy moments since its release in 1990, the film did bring more popularity notice to NASCAR racing, which had not been as well represented up until that moment in Hollywood, and is still the go-to film when people think of the sport.
Well, how about that? A sound we don't have to fix. I don't want you spoiled, Buck.
The first rule of Italian driving. What's behind me is not important.
A coast-to-coast racing film that predated some of the more star-studded ones that would follow, the Gumball Rally was a fun and well-received film that had gained a fan base who still enjoy it fondly to this day. Taking a light-hearted approach during an era in the 70s that was still in a more serious, dark-tone mode in its films up to that point, Gumball had an ensemble of colourful characters and a great collection of luxury, sports and muscle cars, most of which today would fetch a hefty price in the collector's market and at auctions. This included a Ferrari 365 GTS Daytona, a Porsche 911, Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Roadster, Chevrolet Camaro, Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, and a Shelby 427 Cobra. Although only giving it 2.5 stars at the time of its release, film critic Roger Ebert compared the film with the other 1976 coast-to-coast Roger Corman racing movie, Cannonball, and had pointed out the surprise in that despite the later being a more darker and violent film, both were given a PG rating at the time, and although not finding enough excitement in Gumball, he did find it to be at least entertaining in its execution and hijinks. Taking inspiration from the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash created by Brock Yates that had only gained notoriety a few years prior in magazine articles and within the racing community, it was the Gumball Rally film that had brought this illegal underground race to nationwide attention. This was thought to have been the beginning of the race's then downfall, as it alerted more authorities to the coast-to-coast dash that originally started as a protest against the then impending 55 mph maximum interstate speed limit, which at the time was thought to have been nothing more than an attack against motorcar enthusiasts, as Yates and partner Steve Smith set out to prove that capable drivers with reliable cars could travel from state to state without the need of such nanny restrictions.
No more jokes!
Le Mans. The men. The machines. The motion picture. Steve McQueen stars in it. No one else could.
When your name is Steve McQueen and you are considered the king of cool in Hollywood in the 1960s, expectations are already high to see a man with one of his biggest passions being motor racing and to want to deliver the definitive racing movie ever made. After coming second at Sebring in his Porsche 908, McQueen set his sights on taking on the world-famous 24-hour Le Mans as the setting for his next upcoming movie. Bringing in director John Sturges, who had worked with Steve on The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, and having shown off his dedication to realism in Fast Driving just a few years earlier with Bullet, it would seem like the star was on the road to make another hit. Originally wanting to actually compete at Le Mans and film his movie at the same time, the actor was forced to choose as he could not be permitted to do both due to the insurance company refusing to take such a risk on the actor racing and possibly killing himself. McQueen made the tough choice to give up his chance to make motor racing history in order to get his film made no matter the cost. Getting behind the wheel of a Porsche 917K, everything seemed to be in place now for McQueen, with only one vital ingredient missing, and that was a coherent script. The disagreement in how the story would play out and consistent rewrites would lead to what was ultimately the downfall of a film that critics said at the time had visceral emotion but no heart.
When you're racing, it's life. Anything that happens before or after, it's just waiting.
The flag, and finally the Japanese Grand Prix is underway!
Focusing on the famous rivalry between Formula One legends James Hunt and Niki Lauda, Rush was released in 2013 and was received well and praised for its dynamic focus on two men in racing who could not have been more different in life and style, yet complemented one another as each was the antithesis of his opponent on the racetrack. Leading up to the tragic incident in the 1976 Grand Prix Championship, which saw the horrific accident of the Austrian driver Lauda, a major part of the film's appeal was in just how dangerous the sport was and how thrilling the fame and glory of victory could be during an era of Formula One racing that many considered to be at the peak of its competitiveness. Directed by Ron Howard, who had been no stranger to directing car chases, which is where he had gotten his first directorial debut nearly 40 years earlier with Grand Theft Auto, Howard was able to capture the speed and the tension of the race as well and bring his audience along for the ride, placing his cameras closer than ever before to the action. In order to recreate some of the Formula One cars of the time, a number of Formula 3 chassis, some of which were of the period belonged to the hands of collectors, were obtained with interchangeable F1 custom shells, made and used according to the scene they were needed in. One of which was the Niki Lauda Ferrari 312T, which had a Ford 2-litre Duratec 20 engine that sold at auction for $44,000 soon after the film's release. It is in one or two Hollywood cliches and conflicts played out that lowers Rush ever so slightly down the list, yet its strength is in showing a side of racing in its rivalry aspect between two men, as both James and Niki are portrayed as being neither the hero or villains of this great addition to the racing film genre, and are remembered for the energy they brought with the passion of racing.
I'll see you on race day, champ.
You will, champ.
You ready? The name on the middle of that steering wheel should tell you that I was born ready, Shelby. Hit it. Attaboy.
Only just beating the number 3 spot, as both films could have been interchangeable with the positions given, Ford v Ferrari, or Le Mans 66 as titled in other territories, told the true story of the events that led up to the Ford Motor Company developing one of its greatest motor cars ever to be made for racing, and the relationship between two legends in the sport, Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles. As with other true racing story films on this list, Ford v Ferrari took a number of liberties with its source material as it told the story of the lead up to the 1966 24-hour Le Mans race and how two friends were given the task of getting one of the first American motor companies to win perhaps one of the biggest motor racing events in the world. An aspect that this film gave more attention to than other films when it came to motorsports was in the corporate politics behind many of the decisions that lead up to a major racing event and the development of a racing vehicle, and how despite the protest of those who actually drive and develop these motorcars, bureaucracy often gets in the way when too many people and personal feelings get involved. Showing its main protagonist Ken Miles, played to form by Christian Bale, as being somewhat of a maverick in the sport, along with friend Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, the film showcased the development and contribution the race driver and automotive designer gave towards creating the Ford GT40, and how, though exaggerated in the film, the race was not seen as the type of material Ford wanted to represent its image in the sport. This all led to one of the most controversial decisions in motor racing history taking place, all at the request of a photo finish by Ford which many even today argue was a travesty against racing and the hard work so many people put in all for the sake of publicity. The film contains a number of wonderful practical effects and in-camera action stunts and races that make it a must-see for any racing fan, and the story overall is one about bonding and friendship.
Now knock it off, Ken. We got work to do and this car ain't gonna build itself.
A film that broke the mold of racing movies and changed cinema forever, John Frankenheimer's 1966 masterpiece Grand Prix is a testament to the borderline insanity of a director who wanted to get the most realism from a Formula One racing film ever caught on camera. Wanting to avoid the traditional way of filming a racing movie by using stock footage and having an act on a soundstage in a car show with rear projection footage superimposed behind them, John Frankenheimer made the choice to attach cameras onto actual racing vehicles and to film them going in excess of 160 miles per hour with actors behind the wheel. The director would later question how he was able to pull off such a feat and not have caused any major fatalities. A number of techniques were used to capture the driving all in camera and to keep the action in motion and avoid as much pedestrian and static angles as possible. This included the use of a race car ready GT40 doubling as a camera car driven by racing legend Phil Hill in order to keep up with the high speeds needed, along with using remotely operated mounts attached to the cars themselves. Insisting on having his actors be seen actually driving using Formula 3 cars made look like Formula 1, along with hiring race drivers for supporting roles, Frankenheimer had put his actors through racing school for a number of months before filming. The film's lead, James Gardner, who trained for 2 months under instructions from Shelby race driving legend Bob Bondurant, would go on to say that Gardner had the potential to have been a well-accomplished race driver who could have performed professionally with success. Though originally wanting to hire Steve McQueen for the lead, who opted not to star in this film and wanted to go off to make a racing movie of his own, Grand Prix played as much as a romantic drama as it did a racing film that focused on 4 international Formula 1 drivers and how their varying careers would play out and the effect it would have on themselves and the women they loved. Initially wanting no involvement in the film, Enzo Ferrari would change his mind quickly after seeing early footage captured and gave the production crew access to shoot in their racing factory and capturing their collection of then racing vehicles and supporting the film thereon. The film would go on to win 3 Oscars for sound, sound effects and editing, and although it was in the top 10 highest grossing films of the year of its release, it did not make a huge profit given its almost $21 million gross to its $9 million budget, yet it would go on to become one of the most respected and important racing movies in cinema history that forever changed the genre. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in order to help this channel grow and to bring you more content like this one, as your support is what keeps this channel going.